Good evening, welcome. I'd like to call to order the Thursday, February 16th Financial Planning Committee. First order of business is the approval of minutes from the February 9th meeting. Read them? Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion on it? Hearing none? So, next order of business, discussion regarding capital budget plan. John, you want to walk us through that?
Sure. So in the packet is a revised FY24 capital budget. The projects haven't changed, but based on the actions taken by the project has changed, but based on the action taken by the Board of Selectmen on Monday night regarding the ARPA discussion, for those of you that might have missed it, the board voted to release $1.7 million to fund the full Proctor School roof. They chose not to release ARPA funds for the $900,000 fire engine or the $475,000 tight tank compliance project at the DPW yard. So based on those votes that we're taking, this body recommended, Mike Hodge, representing the Financial Planning Committee, called in, made the recommendation to the board. So based on that, I've modified the capital budget so the $1.7 million Proctor School roof is no longer on it because it's now being funded with ARPA. As you look in the three columns to the right, these are the funding sources. So where we were originally showing the engine replacement using ARPA and the DPW tight tank using ARPA, I've eliminated that as a funding source, and now those are showing up as general obligation bonds. So in total, we have 10 projects that will go to town meeting as 10 separate warrant articles. They total $2,830,000. $1,105,000 will be paid for using free cash. So basically, the 3 police cruisers, the repairs to the police station exterior and painting for $70,000. The roadway improvements for $300,000. The 20-ton dump truck for $355,000. The 1-ton truck replacement for $150,000, and the Z School walkway entrance repairs for $40,000. So those projects totaling $1,105,000 will be paid for out of free cash, which has no additional tax impact. So all those projects can get approved at town meeting without any debt service associated with them. The 2 projects that are from the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund, one is the 15-ton dump truck for $225,000, and then there's the SCADA Phase 2. This is the remote monitoring of our critical water and sewer infrastructure. This is the matching grant allocation of $125,000 that the DPW director talked to you about at a prior meeting. Both those projects are funded out of essentially free cash from the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund, so fund balance. So there's no additional rate impact and there's no bonding. Those total $350,000. And then last, we have the 2 projects that were recommended to be funded with ARPA that are now going to go to town meeting for a bond authorization. And that's the fire engine at $900,000 and the DPW tight tank at $475,000. So those 2 projects total $1,375,000. So just to summarize again, 10 projects are going forward. Those projects total $2,830,000. $1,105,000 of the projects will be funded with free cash, no additional tax impact. $350,000 will be funded with free cash from the Water and Sewer Enterprise Funds with no additional tax or rate impact. And then lastly, $1,375,000 in debt will have to be authorized to pay for the engine replacement and the DPW tight tank. So this is the revision based on the actions that the board voted on Monday. There will be individual warrant articles for all of these with these funding sources as needed. If you turn to the attached staple page, this is the proposed FY 2024 free cash plan. So when I, usually beginning in October, November, I give you guys a plan based on what we have for available funds. So this year we have $2,440,000 in free cash. Originally, what we try to do is, well, let me just walk you through. So there's 2.44 million in free cash. We use 175,000 for the emergency fund that's handled by the Appropriations Committee. We roll 500,000 into the operating budget, which is less than 1%, which is in accordance with our policy. We're putting 200,000 into stabilization to maintain our reserves between 8 and 9%. And then we are spending $1,105,000 on capital projects. Normally, our goal is to leave 500,000 in unallocated free cash, just because that's how much we use in next year's operating budget. So if something bad happened, a recession, a pandemic, we know we can replicate that for 1 year, so we have a whole year to figure out what we're doing. In order to fit these projects, I had to dip into that for the first time since fiscal 2012 by $40,000. I couldn't fit the Z School rear entrance in there, but it's a critical project that needs to move forward. It's not going to materially impact our reserves, $6+ million overall. So, but I did have to, for the first time, dip down in here. Things are tight. We don't have the level of available funds, but I don't feel comfortable postponing that project because it's a safety issue at the school, and it needs to be done. So I'll modify the line here that shows the capital projects at 1,105,000 and 73. That 73 will drop down into the reserve at the bottom, but basically this is the revised plan. And this plan then supports the revised capital budget that we just walked through.
So John, quick question.
Yes.
So on the general bond obligation that you need to do with interest rates continuing to go up this year, so instead of, we're not going to use ARPA funds, right? So we need the debt. There's going to be a financial impact. Is there going to be more of a financial impact as rates continue to go up?
Yes. So obviously, we'll get authorization to issue debt at town meeting. And then from the time that you are authorized debt, normally what we do is we'll advance ourselves the money to immediately be able to, engage the contracts to order. We'll float bond anticipation notes, depending on what's happening in the market. It's really weird right now, and I know you know this, Tom, because you're in the market like constantly, but our bond counsel's advising us now that the bonds are actually more expensive than the permanent debt at the moment because the market is turning.
Right.
So we'll look at all of that. But essentially you'll get authorization at town meeting, and then we're not going to go out to issue bonds for $1.3 million. I mean,
Right.
there's issuance costs. You have to pay to get rated, which is why these projects were recommended to be funded with ARPA, because they're not, it's not like a building project. So what we do is we'll wait. I mean, we typically have, small bonding authorizations, and we'll package them together to get to, $4 or $5 million, and then we issue the bond. So again, this decision was made Monday. I met with the finance director, and he made a phone call to our bond counsel to talk through some of this stuff, but we don't know exactly how it's going to play out. But clearly, interest rates are going up. Just so that something that folks need to know is, when you go to town meeting and you get authorization to issue debt, you don't issue the exact amount. It's for the project. And then, because we don't know what the interest rates are going to be, we don't know if we're going to get a premium or when the bonds are bid on. So we don't know any of that. So So there is leeway. You're authorizing debt for the project, but in a good faith effort, these projects, this is roughly what they're gonna cost, plus interest. So originally, we had, for the 3 projects, if those 3 projects were done with debt, we ran a debt table, it averaged about $61 to the average single-family home. Doing these 2, and I think at like 4.5%, you gotta pick a number, and that's roughly where the market is. This would be about $27, $28 on the average single-family home tax bill. And again, there's a lot of variables. If you have a home that's more than the average, you're gonna pay more. If you have less, you'll pay a little bit less, but we try to give a good faith estimate, an order of magnitude of what we're looking at. And it's about $30 on the average tax bill, estimated at this point.
John, the fire chief said that there's probably a 2-year backlog for ordering this equipment.
Yes.
And 900,000, what's the expectation of how much we gotta put down?
We don't, it depends on how the contract is structured. Usually they want something you buy the chassis to get it into the assembly line.
Yep.
But it's a custom build apparatus that's just for Northborough based on our specifications. So, we will, we don't, clearly the bulk of we're gonna pay it when we take delivery of the vehicle. But in order for me to sign the contract, we have to have the money authorized. So that's really the key.
So with bond interest and everything else, this is cost plus,
Yes,
time value of money.
yes, it's
gonna cost the
900,000
taxpayers more than
plus,
$900,000 for this rig.
900,000 plus whatever interest is. And I have a debt schedule I could share with you if you're interested. But we try to always show it, not, because debt service it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars on an annual basis, but people don't know what that means to them personally. That's why I always try to say what these 2 projects at one point, just short of 1.4 million, is going to translate into about $30 on the average single-family home tax bill for the next 10 years. So $300 roughly. Which is about half, taking the Proctor School roof out of the mix, that was, 1.7. So again, that makes sense, it was about $61, and this is about, roughly half. And again, depending on the interest rate, depending on, a whole bunch of things.
Is it okay if I make a comment on the ARPA discussion, seeing we're talking about it?
Yeah.
I was disappointed in what happened Monday. Obviously, I called in to represent our committee. Appropriations felt the same way, so the advisory committees were ignored, and I just feel that to use the ARPA money, and they reconsider, that'd be great. To hold money for what-ifs, wishes, and things that just don't currently exist is financially irresponsible. We have a lot of viable projects coming up that are going to cost money, and 1.37 is not a huge number, but it's a number, and we're gonna have to go borrow it. We know what's coming, and the money's being held back, where again, it's not gonna go through boards and committees, which are currently being ignored. It's not gonna go to town meeting. People will not have input in it. I feel that it is exceptionally irresponsible, the decision they made. That's my comment.
Anybody else?
I agree with Mike. I mean,
Okay, John, sorry.
these projects have been in front of the Board of Selectmen for many months, and the ARPA money's been out there for many months. And these are costing the town more than it would have if the decision was made to use that money months ago. We've got $4+ million in ARPA funds. We were looking at spending up to 3 and change, leaving about $1.3 million on the table for what-ifs. I don't think that's irresponsible if we use it that way. We're using money, if we use the ARPA money, it's money that is cheaper for us to use than going out to the bond market on this.
I think the only comment I'd add to that, I agree with that, is if we did use the ARPA funds, then the projects that a few people had talked about for the downtown beautification, we would use free cash. We would use other methods in order to pay for that in following years, right?
Realistically, free cash is great for pickup trucks and generators and those smaller projects. The medium-sized projects, you can sometimes, if you have good free cash, you can pay for them. But the projects that are being contemplated for the downtown revitalization, these are multi-million-dollar projects. So realistically, those would be, if not funded with ARPA, would be funded with debt. And that debt would go, that discussion would go through the financial boards and committees and be authorized by town meeting.
Have to bring up the interest rate curve, because in 2024 and 25, and this is from the Federal Reserve, these are from all the big banks, interest rates will be going down considerably in the following years. So it just makes sense that we wouldn't issue debt now, we would issue debt in the future because it would be a lot cheaper.
And on top of that, I just think it makes sense we have a budget, we have a 6-year plan. It's been vetted, discussed, it's due. Downtown beautification, these other projects should go through the same process every other project goes through. That's why we have good ratings, we have low cost of borrowing, even though rates are higher for sure. I'm just worried that the money, we have a recent history of spending money leading us down much more expensive paths when things are not fully vetted. And I do not want to see history repeat itself.
That's why the process is the way it is.
That's why it is. And when we deviate from that, we get ourselves into problems. So I know we could go round and round on that, but, I did want to get on the record.
One last
The
question.
official record.
That ARPA money that we got, is that in an interest-bearing account today?
Yes,
It is.
yes. It's money that we physically have possession of.
Right.
Yes. Unless it's in a stabilization account or a special revenue account, the interest earned on that is considered a general revenue, general fund revenue.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, thank you. Next item of business, Community Preservation Committee.
Want to introduce yourself for the record, Mr. Leland?
Good evening. My name's Jeff Leland. I'm a member of the CPA and CPC. Thank you for having me here. I am here in our chair's stead, and I think each of you have in front of you most of the materials that we looked at, but most importantly, the summary from our chair about the decisions the committee made for this year's projects. And I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have. I can go into more detail here, and even talk about the process, whatever the chair would like.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just the items that you approved funding for, the White Cliffs, you talked about a little bit,
Sure.
the dog park, and the trail at the senior center, the three that we're really interested in.
Very good. I'd be happy to do that. I'd just like to bring your attention to the summary, and the first paragraph, I think, is very important, where we lay out really the kind of 4 key things that we think about: applicability to CPA guidelines, community support, affordability, and also the urgency for this year. So much like your board, as I just heard, we look at these projects over time, and several of these projects, especially the ones you just noted, are ones that have been multi-year projects that we have been funding and/or supporting, as well as discussing, and also keeping in mind for future needs. So the first one, of course, is the White Cliffs bond, and when the town bought that, it is paid for, and we have funded the bond with, this year it's $188,000. In the packet of information that came October 6, 2022, shows on the 7th page.
That's this document here. This is the financial report from the finance director on the CPC funds.
That shows the debt service for the White Cliffs and outlines where we stand in the multi-year payment of that bond. This year it's $188,000, and the CPC continues to support that as a primary primary importance. Now, there is a little discrepancy. I think there may be a slight difference of $11,359 that will have to be added to that. It came up as from the town account. So there may be another meeting that we have to figure out where to put that and how to add that on to that number.
Yeah, we're still working on the final warrant, and so these are numbers that might get tweaked a tiny bit.
The second major project, or the second item is the CPA administrative expenses. That's 5%, up to 5% where we can put away for administrative expenses. We have done that traditionally, and we've utilized that for certain expenses that have come up. In the last couple of years, we actually used it for some additional funds for some White Cliff feasibility matters. The next big one is the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. By law, we have to set aside 10% of new revenue. So that's $77,000 based on having $770,000 of state funds this year. The North Road Dog Park has been something like, that has been in the works and discussions for, I think, approximately 18 years. This is a second phase. We already put a first phase in, and so we felt it was very important to continue that support. There's a great deal of community support, and we wanted to continue supporting that as well.
Jeff, if I could just interrupt you
Please.
for a moment. So we did receive a $25,000 grant from the Stanton Foundation to, I believe Scott Charpentier might have covered this at your last meeting, but just so people who tuned in might want to know. That is to finish the full design, and so then we're talking here about construction. So this is an allocation of $347,500 for construction. It is anticipated that we are going to apply and receive a grant from the Stanton Foundation on the order of magnitude of about $200,000. The fact that they funded the design grant means they only do that if they're really interested in funding the next phase. They only exist, they do 10 dog parks a year, and we're in the queue, and the town planner has experience doing that grant. So the project is the CPC funding, but also is contingent on receiving that Stanton grant for a couple $100,000, which we're cautiously optimistic that'll happen.
The next few projects did not quite meet our criteria for this year, and so we.
You wanna cover the senior center trail?
I apologize, I missed that one. Yes,
That's when they're interested.
the ADA accessible trail for the senior center. Again, it's a continuing project that we have supported. It was, we had a wonderful presentation by the DPW superintendent, and we voted unanimously to continue supporting that with new revenue as well as some of our unreserved funds.
So that project is designed, this is construction now. So this is to actually build it.
And it's, I believe it's the only ADA compliant trail certainly in the town, but it should be like our Aspen Park, a premier facility for our town.
When we built the senior center, we looked and by the way, you're looking at the chairman of the senior center, Jeff Leland was our committee chair.
A long time ago.
Saw through the whole thing, but we spent a lot of time talking about the siting of that building, and we talked about an ADA accessible trail around the pond back then. We didn't have the funding to do it, but it's something that we have been talking about, and it's actually great to see it coming to fruition.
So as I said, the next few projects, which we may support in future years, just did not meet all the criteria this year with the funding that we had available. The historic reserve account, we passed over that because of some of the upcoming matters with the White Cliffs, which would fall into that category as well.
Jeff, can I
Sure.
tackle that, seeing you brought up the elephant in the room and my single biggest pet peeve? Has the committee already made its decision? Because I see a lot of things here passed on for future because we want this, we want that. And some things, for instance, I'll pick on the tennis courts. Those are clear and present hazard that the town's gonna have to pay for. Similar not quite as in scope, but the money's there, could be paid, and it seems that we're withholding money so we can buy our way out of the White Cliffs. Has this decision already been made by the committee to withhold those funds for that proposal?
No, the money that we have, we've kept, historically, I've only been on the committee a couple of years. We've kept a reserve so that we didn't spend all the money that we had for not any specific project like the White Cliffs, but for potential future projects, be it historic, be it open space, or something like the White Cliffs. So we utilized some of that reserve funds, unreserved funds this year, but we wanted to keep a balance for a project like the White Cliffs or other ones that, like last year, we were deep into the process of supporting an affordable housing project, and that did not go through at the last minute. And that's where some of the additional funds that are available were there this year. So things like that are what we're keeping, rather than spend all the money, we're trying to keep some of it available. So please,
I didn't mean to interrupt.
not at all. I was just gonna say, speaking to the tennis courts, that the discussion generally was that it was a project that had just come forward. It hadn't been presented to our committee before this year. And since some of these other ones were already deep into the process, we felt that it wasn't right at this time to support that from the CPC or CPA, but a lot of us individually feel that we will support it at town meeting.
So if I may, one other wrinkle with this, these are tennis courts, just so we're clear, these are tennis courts at the regional high school, which is a separate legal entity, is not the town of Northborough. So that's a complicating factor, because if we were gonna use community preservation funding for that, then the town of Southborough has to commit their funding as well, and there was some question about whether or not they were able to do that. And then the money needs to flow through the regional agreement in terms of the assessment, which is based on a 6-year rolling average of enrollment. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and that project is moving forward, will be on town meeting for a vote. But the superintendent, again, bringing that project forward, they want to shake every tree to see if there's any other potential funding sources. So the CPC was one, but trying to get both towns to agree and then funnel it through the regional agreement, it was complicated. Not impossible, but complicated, and given the time frame, trying to line up with Southborough and getting their votes, and what happens if their votes don't go through because their town meeting is before ours, all of that stuff is the question. But I agree with you, Mike, that the project absolutely needs to be done. We'll go to town meeting, and you'll be voting later tonight as a committee whether or not to support it.
And I
It's
picked
just
that-
whether or not you use CPC.
I picked that project because it's one that I'm actually familiar with, because I was involved with boosters in the school for a long time. So it's been known, to us, not to you guys, and because right there it says potential for White Cliffs in downtown. So that's why I picked on that particular,
Sure.
item, because you gave me, now I feel like a lawyer, you gave me the exact language I needed to ask the questions.
Not at all.
But again, that project's been discussed at length for years at the regional school committee, not here. Only when it's fully baked, which it is now, you had a presentation last year, and knowing that it was gonna come forward, for that project come forward this year. But again, it's a separate legal entity with their own capital planning process, and it's just unique, and that distinction's important.
Jeff, question.
Sure.
The White Cliffs was designated a historic building,
I believe it's historic.
and in the context of things like the National Historic Trust, what does that mean?
So I'm going to defer to John if he
Just-
can on this one. Sorry about that.
It's, for purposes of the Community Preservation Act, the building is a historic building that qualifies for funding. This building that you're in right now qualifies to use CPC funding on, so that's the standards that apply. You don't have to be on the National Registry or mass historic listings of any kind. And that building is, 1800s, it's clearly historic. So there's no question that it qualifies for CPC
I
funding.
understand that.
Does it, yeah, you're gonna.
But my follow-on question is, does that designation mean that building can never be torn down?
What it means is, if you buy, this is complicated, but I'm gonna run you through this because it's a really good question. If you buy the building with CPC funds, like we did, and you designate it and you're going to use it, you're required to put a historic preservation restriction on it. And if that's the case, then yes, that historic preservation restriction survives. The building can't be torn down. What we did is we bought it using CPC funds, which implies that we have the intention of putting a historic preservation restriction on that building. However, not knowing what the ultimate use was going to be, until we know what it is, then that would inform what that historic preservation restriction ultimately looks like. So right now, you're probably aware, is that the town went through a public bid process. There were proposals, and the White Cliffs Committee has recommended one proposal to move forward. So as part of that, if we were going to transfer ownership and move forward with that project, one of the things to be negotiated is, what is that historic preservation restriction? What does that look like? And by the way, it's a continuum. It can be preserving just a streetscape, it can be preserving everything in the building, it can be something in between. So depending on what the use
Does
is.
that designation have to be transferred with the building?
Yes.
In some
In
some size or
perpetuity,
whatever?
yep,
Okay.
Is
perpetuity.
there any
It's-
unringing of the bell?
No. No. So once you go down and you lock that preservation restriction in, that's it. We're not there yet. For instance, if this project doesn't, this proposal doesn't move forward, if the town cannot come up with another partner to reuse that building, there is the potential that you could sell the building and walk away from it, but the community preservation funds would have to be made whole again. You know, so that money would go back there.
So
But
if we
you-
sell it, we just reimburse ourselves for the building,
Yes.
and a developer could come in, level it, and put in 5 houses.
If you just sell it,
Or whatever.
if there's no option, and I was clear about this when we bought and I know you were, because you're conservative like I am, it's the only project in my 25 years that I've ever come forward, and I was honest, I said, look, we don't have a plan for the building yet, but here's the deal. If you want to try to save it, under the 61A law, you can step into the shoes of the developer and buy it, and then try to figure out if you can save the building. If you can't, then you can sell the building, and without any restrictions, the CPC gets refunded their money. But if we choose one of these proposals, as recommended proposals, just for the sake of argument, say this moves forward, as part of the transfer to that entity, the town would negotiate a preservation restriction which would hold and preserve that building in perpetuity.
I'm just wondering then if, upon further, now that after we bought it, it's been vetted and discussed, if the town could get a redo on this decision, I wonder if faced with possibly having to spend $800,000 to buy our way out of it, to put 52 affordable units at a horrible intersection, or just try to sell it off and recoup the money, which would be the lesser of the evils, because I don't think what the town intended to do is happening now, because lo and behold, its usefulness is not quite what I think people thought it would be. I think people thought maybe someone would come in and open up another function hall. So I just wonder, is that an option for the town to look at? Get a redo on it, instead of maybe
Well, what's
adding
gonna
problems.
happen is, and I encourage everybody to watch and participate, because the chair of the board, of the select board, takes public comment on anything that's on the agenda. So at the meeting on the 27th, the Metro West group that is making the proposal is going to come in and do a presentation, and the select board then is going to discuss their proposal and determine if it's something that they want to move forward with. If they don't move forward with that project, I'm not quite sure where we go from here, because we've run this out pretty good. You basically have two options. If you don't move forward with the recommended proposal, you can either use municipal funds to fix the building up for some municipal purpose and use, which is somewhere in the order of magnitude of, $7 to $10 million, based on the old estimates. Or you could structure a new request for proposals that somehow is different from the one that we just did. And the one that we just did was as broad as it could possibly be. But basically, it's like your house, you take your house off the market and you put it back on the market. We can do that. I'm not sure what else we're going to get with that process. That would have to be a separate discussion. So those are really your two options. And if you run out and you don't have any use, then the town will continue to hold it, and then the town is going to need to appropriate from some funding source enough to carry, building carrying costs.
But it does sound like there is a way out, is to sell it off without the historic restriction and have,
Yes, it's a process, but
But-
yes, that is an option.
I'm just looking at, what we're being faced with, and this, maybe is something for the selectmen to consider, that, you very get a redo in life. It's an expensive redo, but I don't think this all played out the way, and look, I love the way we hosted events there. My office was community affairs. They did it. Loved the building. Voted against it because I was afraid we'd end up here. But I think it didn't end up the way a lot of people were hoping. And
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think
clearly-
what's happening. So, there is which is exactly what you were asking, there is a way to,
Cut bait.
yes. Okay.
Yeah, we're not there yet. We have a proposal that is viable, that has been recommended by the White Cliffs Committee to the Board of Selectmen the White Cliffs Committee's job was to go through this process and come up with a viable option. They've made their recommendation. Now it rests with the Select Board, whether or not they want to choose that or not. And if they don't, then the discussion that you're referring to, Mike, which is what do we do now, then that's a discussion that would need to take place.
I would like to let everyone on that committee know, I'm not chastising anything you did. You gave a ton of work. You did the exact job you were asked to do. Please do not take any comment I am saying. It's just, what are the alternatives besides that? So please don't take anything
Yeah, and in the future,
disparaging.
as this gets further, again, I recommend that you tune in, you watch Monday's, the 27th Select Board meeting, and if you have comments, you can offer your comments then. But if the decision comes down at some point further down the line of what are we going to do, then that's a valid thing to put on your agenda with the information in real time at that point, and have a discussion as a committee. If you want to weigh in on it, that would be appropriate at that time. Yeah.
Thanks for going down that rabbit hole with us.
Happy to do it. Glad John's here.
It's not this stuff, I like, when I go to town meeting and I say we need a fire engine or we need a building or whatever, I'm confident in that all the i's are dotted and the t's are crossed. This one, we had to put ourselves out there. And the one thing I kept saying to folks is, it's like, well, we wasted $2 million. Well, you haven't, because you have an asset that's worth now more than we paid for it. We had to put money in to stabilize the building. But at the end of the day, just for the sake of argument, if you did sell it, you would be mostly whole. You would maybe be out a small amount of money that you don't recoup, but you gave it, no one can ever say you didn't try. You saw it all the way through, and we've been at this for, 2 years. There's a lot of, and at a minimum, the process to date, at least if you ever did lose the building, I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but it's fully documented. We have every bit of historic detail from the building, but this needs to play out, and decisions need to be made, and based on that, other comments and decisions will come to play. But right now, we have a viable proposal. The board's gonna take it up, and then if they did want to move forward with that, it would be, you have to negotiate a historic preservation agreement on the property, a purchase and sale, and then a funding source. The only other thing that I would add is, in terms of the building we didn't buy it because it made good economic sense. We bought it because it's a part of the fabric of the community, we want to see if we can save it, okay? That's why we bought it. It never made good economic sense. If it did, somebody in the private sector would have bought it and renovated it and opened it back up. So what the community has to decide is how much they're willing to invest to save the building. But just want to come back to their proposal. One of the reasons why their proposal is truly economically viable as opposed to the other ones is the affordable housing concept has all sorts of funding sources that have been incentivized at the state level. When those monies come to bear, it closes that funding gap that the private sector couldn't close. The other piece of it is the community preservation money. They're asking for another $800,000 of community preservation money. Just so we're clear, the town is in a position to provide that, and that will not add anything to anybody's tax bill, because the Community Preservation Act is a surcharge on your taxes. It's the same every year, and then we get the state match, whatever percentage that is. So that money exists right now because they have to put, as Jeff mentioned, 10% into affordable housing. Minimum has to be spent. So there's a pool of money that's there already that we have designated to the Northborough Affordable Housing Corp. And right now, it's just shy of $500,000. And they don't have a project for affordable housing. It can only be used for affordable housing. So that money that's already been set aside, and the other money, they have to put another $77,000 in this year by law into that fund. So that $800,000 threshold is not a reason not to move forward with that proposal, because it can only be spent on affordable housing, and it's already designated, and it's already baked into your taxes. There's no additional money to be spent. So that in and of itself, all you could do is say, I want to spend, you have to spend that $800,000 on affordable housing. You either can do it at White Cliffs or at some other project, but you can't spend it on roads, you can't spend it on a fire engine, because the way the law is structured, that's the bucket. And it's important for people to know that money exists. Most of it is sitting in the bank now in the town if they wanted to do the project. And I'm not advocating for this project. I just want people to have clear information that if that project moves forward, your taxes aren't going to go up by $800,000 like you're buying another fire engine. It'll have no effect. It's already baked into the basic, in the base tax bill. And most of that money has been built up because they have to spend it by law on affordable housing. It's literally sitting in the bank. So you're going to spend $800,000 on affordable housing at some point, either at White Cliffs or someplace else. That's not up for debate. The question is whether or not you want to spend it at White Cliffs. So, and again, I'm not trying to talk anybody into anything. I don't want people to take. It's all about making sure people have good information.
Right.
That's all. So.
All right, Jeff, thanks.
I told Jeff this is an easy group. You
Well,
guys
there's no adversarial
Not at all.
relationships here, it's question and answer.
John summarized the last point I was going to make, where I said at the ending balance, and that is, we have unreserved fund of nearly $600,000. That's for any project, not just White Cliffs, not affordable housing, that's just unreserved for the CPA. Then Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, if the $77,000 goes in this year, they're at just under $300,000. That will be in addition to the nearly $500,000 that they already have. So that's just to summarize. And then this last piece here, this is just kind of a pie chart that was put together, and it shows that the affordable housing of the three major buckets has received the least amount over the whole history of our CPA here in Northborough, just to give an idea. So, I thank you for your time,
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
and you guys do a wonderful job, I appreciate it.
You guys as well, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Just, if I may, through the chair, just one last comment with regard to the CPC projects for anybody that's watching at home might be wondering. We're going to talk about your recommendations. The Community Preservation Act and the CPC projects really are a separate legal process, but oftentimes there's a nexus between what you do as a capital, and the capital plan, in that a lot of these projects will have free cash and CPC funds together. But the bottom line is, what this committee historically has done, and you can change your mind tonight if you wanted to, because this isn't a policy or a law, but what you have done historically is, when you look at the projects, you don't care that they're putting $38,000 into administrative fund, or spending $5,000 on a sign on a cemetery or something, because those types of projects wouldn't come to you anyway. So what the committee historically has done is, you look at the projects and you say, if the dog park wasn't being funded with CPC funds, it'd be in front of this committee for consideration. If the senior center trail project wasn't being funded with CPC, that would come before you. So just for folks at home who may not know, in order to be included in the capital project, it's a minimum $25,000 cost, a useful life of 5 years or more, and eligible to be funded with debt. That's the definition of a capital project in Northborough. So you sort of apply your definition to the CPC funds, to the CPC projects, and render a recommendation for the ones that would qualify for you. And that's why, so out of all these, the White Cliffs debt, the Northborough Dog Park, and the ADA Senior Center Accessible Trail, based on what you've done historically, would be the only 3 projects that you would render a recommendation. The rest wouldn't qualify for your consideration. And again, there are projects that are a little bit more, but their money's going to an outside agency that's not the town of Northborough, like the Historic Society or historic church, or it could be a private home. You don't weigh in on those historic, just so people at home know the parameters.
Well said, John. Okay. So that brings up our next item on our agenda here is the discussion of our report and voting on some of the, voting on the items that we're going to recommend or not. The first couple pages is the part that is real rough. I haven't finished going over that yet, so we'll skip over that for a minute. And then, well, it says page 55 on our handout here. The top talks about our priority system, which hasn't changed. Then it goes into the articles. Starts off with the police cruisers and the police station. And it goes through all the different projects that we were presented in previous meetings. Community Preservation Act, those projects are separated out, we just went through those. Algonquin, we saw those people previously. And then the last page here, on page 59, is kind of a recap, summary on these projects. So what I'd like to do is get our votes on those. We've had that information for quite a while. What I'd like to do is combine, if it's okay with you guys, combine all the municipality stuff from the police cruiser all the way down to the SCADA for the water and sewer. Maybe we'll just do the police, fire, and DPW, combine all those as one and vote on those, okay? Then we can vote on the water and sewer, we'll vote on the school, vote on CPC, and then that one other project is the Algonquin. Okay?
We do have, just for the record, one member that has identified a conflict of interest, which is Tom, who sits on the committee for the athletic complex, so that one needs to be taken separately, and Tom would need to recuse himself. Otherwise, there's no right or wrong way to do this. You can take a vote on each of these individually. You can, take them as one vote, but depending on whether or not you're all on the same page about what you're doing. But generally, what you do is, historically, is you would, the capital plan projects, which would be the police cruiser through the Z School roof, could be lumped together as one motion, and then the CPC projects could be one motion, and then the high school complex could be one motion. Or you could do them all individually. It's really whatever you guys want to do.
Right, so we have to vote on combining them?
No, you don't have to vote on combining. You just make a motion, and you'd have to list out all the projects. You can do it any way you want.
Can I ask, these have been before us, we've seen them for years, does anyone have any, issues they want to address with bundling them, where we need to carve one out necessarily?
I don't have an issue.
I'm good with bundling, and
Take a
well,
motion.
As long as it's,
I don't think we need the motion on bundle, then we want to make a motion on.
Approving them as the bundle.
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the from the police cruiser replacement down to the Z School repair as one vote, if you will, one recommendation.
Okay. Is there a second? I'd second that. Okay, is there any discussion on voting to approve? No? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving? Aye. Okay. Next item is the CPC stuff.
So these are just the three, it's a White Cliffs Bond, the dog park, and the ADA accessible trail.
I'm still comfortable commenting on these, because there might be a project next year we might want to comment on, so I think in maintaining tradition, but, again, with the committee has, you know, we've seen these, we've been presented these, some of one, you know, this, the White Cliffs is historic. Any problem bundling the three CPA funds into one? I'll make a motion to bundle them. Do I need to?
And approve
Just in
them?
terms of being clear on the motion, if I may suggest some language.
Sure.
You would move, the motion would be that you move to recommend approval of, and then list the projects out. That you move to recommend approval of the White Cliffs Bond, the construction of the dog park, and the ADA accessible trail.
I could never take an oath because I forgot what he just said. I make a motion to approve the White Cliffs Bond, the construction of the Northborough Dog Park, and the construction of the ADA Trail Senior Center.
Second.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
All good projects.
Hearing none. Any, those in favor of approval?
Aye.
Aye.
Your votes are to recommend approval to town meeting. Town meeting will approve the project, so you just recommend, it's your recommendation to town meeting.
Okay.
Recommend approval. Right.
Then the last one is the
We should wait a sec
high school project.
for Tom to move.
We'll wait for
Tom,
that.
you would need to recuse yourself, which means physically remove yourself from the table.
All right.
So you don't participate in the discussion or the vote. And again, just for the record, Tom is affiliated with the boosters in the committee that was working on the project, so.
All right.
Well,
Is there a motion?
keeping the votes easy, I make a motion to recommend approval of the Algonquin Athletic Complex.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Yeah. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. All right. None of
You
that.
got your steps in, Tom. 10 of them.
So, okay, so just to recap then, you have recommended approval of the projects that are listed out here in the report. So I'm working with my staff to just go through, and I want to verify, it's really, I'm just verifying the information, make sure that each of the projects is accurate. Dave, you're going to draft basically the transmittal letter piece of it, and then between you and I, we'll send it out to the committee. The committee can look at it. If you have any comments, you can send them directly back to your chairman, and then you will meet at next week, just for the sole purpose on February 23rd, to approve your report. So you've already taken your, I mean, if you didn't do anything else, you're not required, you're required to make a report to the town meeting, so it makes the most sense that it's in paper, but you've taken your recommendations at this point, but you have to approve the document itself. And it's only a rough draft right now, so get it out to the committee ahead of time, and then you would take it up at your next meeting, which I imagine would be a fairly short meeting.
Okay. Any other business?
So that's just
I
my, go
was
ahead.
just gonna say, I just want to express the committee's sad to hear about the passing of Richard Smith, a committee member, and we were recently informed of that, so just want to acknowledge, deeply disappointed to hear that and wish the best to his family.
Rich, he was a really good guy and a great member of the committee for about 6 years he served, I believe. So,
Sorry, again, on a
Okay.
down note.
Yeah, well,
I just want to, in terms of any other business, I'm just wondering, is there any other information that you want? Any other information you'd like transmitted to you? I've given you all of the White Cliffs information as it became available. It's all up on the website anyway, on the White Cliffs Committee. You can see the RFP, and you can see all the proposals, as well as the minutes to the meetings. Is there anything else that the committee would like before your next meeting. Any other department or project that you want to hear about that you haven't already? I think you've heard about every project that's planned for the next 6 years.
Good.
Okay. This would be your last chance, because it'll be your last meeting before town meeting.
Okay.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Favor? Adjourn?
Aye.
Adjourn.